showtime. So welcome everyone to our seminar tonight. I hope you can see what it's called, a bit low-tech method. Let my people know. Your questions answered. And I have in mind to take up three interrelated subjects this evening. The first is to discuss the specifics of Pesach this year. We have the convergence of two uncommon phenomena. That the first one, of course, is Pesach that falls on Sunday. That means to say that Erev Pesach is Shabbos, which gives rise to a number of uncommon and complex requirements. The other event is that the clocks change here in Britain, in the UK, on Yom Tov. This is not very common because usually Pesach falls in April. The clocks change the end of March. And of course, even when Pesach falls at the end of March, it's not always the case that Yom Tov coincides with the particular day on the calendar when the clocks change in the UK. For example, in the USA, clocks changed already a week ago. In any case, we have that circumstance as well, and we'd like to comment on that. That's the first area that we're going to discuss this evening. The second is some Haggadah inspiration. And then the third, I'd like to give whoever would like an opportunity to ask questions that they may have preparing for Pesach. As I said, your questions answered. So we'll save the third aspect, although in some cases is maybe the most important. I'd like to save it for the end because those who do not have particular questions that they need answered in that regard, and then not be interested in hearing other people's questions, they can take the opportunity to turn their attention to other subjects for the evening. So that is my intention. So welcome again to our seminar. Let my people know. And I'd like to mention at the outset that the essential guidelines that we're going to explore together right now can also be found in print or electronic form, and you can certainly download and print it out on the Kesher website. These are recommended best practice when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, as well as British Summer Time, officially beginning during Yom Tov. So you can find those guidelines on our website. For those who get our emails, in the email that we sent earlier today, or if you do get it, but you don't always consult it, take the opportunity to view it, click on the link. It's about 2.5, 3 pages, and it does provide quite a lot of detail. But I'd like to take that up now. And of course, if you do have questions along the way, you're welcome to ask if you want to do so. But hopefully we'll be, if not totally comprehensive, at least lucid enough to clarify and to establish the considerations and then the way to address them in a halachic sense. So the background is pretty straightforward. We have a circumstance in which we have 3 consecutive days of Shabbos and Yom Tov. We have Shabbos and 2 days of Yom Tov. But what makes that particularly complex and demanding is that Erev Pesach has a raft of halachos which are unique to that day. So Pesach begins only in the evening, and yet because in antiquity already in the afternoon they would prepare the Korban Pesach, and the Torah itself indicates that the prohibition of chametz begins already at midday on Erev Pesach. And because the rabbis have extended that a little bit as a kind of buffer, and we are, according to the sages, we are forbidden to own chametz from an hour before midday. We are forbidden to consume chametz from 2 hours before midday. And this is true on Erev Pesach, whatever day of the week that may be. So on the one hand, we are significantly constrained in eating chametz on Erev Pesach, basically only in the morning until 10 a.m., for example, in London until 10 a.m. But at the same time, because it's Shabbos, firstly, we want to enjoy Shabbos, we want to eat on Shabbos, we want to eat well on Shabbos, and there is also a mitzvah, of course, of lechem mishnah. So we need to have bread Friday night, we need to have lechem Shabbos morning. We also have Sudah Shishit, which is going to require some discussion as well how that can be achieved. So these are some of the considerations. Plus, from a purely practical standpoint, all of the righteous women of Israel, the righteous men of Israel, for those who are in that circumstance, will prepare the kitchen and the home in advance of Pesach. And in terms of cooking, many people find it more efficient, more convenient. We have nowadays, in most cases, modern appliances, which means that it's practical to prepare for Pesach a few days, even longer ahead. You've got a refrigerator, you've got a freezer, etc. And therefore, under normal circumstances, the kitchen would be turned over to a kosher Pesach status, probably some days before Pesach. Usually, whatever Shabbos is the last Shabbos before Pesach, that's the last hara. And after that, chametz is an endangered species in every Jewish home. Again, because Shabbos falls on Erev Pesach this year, it creates a different kind of obligation or pressure, if you like, although let's not consider it in terms of pressure. Okay, so let's talk about some of the implications, starting with Thursday before Pesach. In other words, Erev Pesach is Friday, but already Thursday we have some considerations that are applicable this year. So the first one I'd like to mention is the fast of the firstborn. That's interesting. The Tanis B'choros is not mentioned in the Talmud. It is mentioned in the Talmudic literature, but not in the Talmud itself. It's mentioned in the rabbinic literature, but nevertheless, the Shulchan Aruch records this practice, which is codified, as I say, in Jewish law, that the firstborn are required or have accepted upon themselves the custom of fasting on Erev Pesach. And because the firstborn of the Egyptians lost their lives, the firstborn of the Hebrews survived, and therefore their firstborn fast. The truth is, and I don't want to dwell on it, but some of the Meforshim wonder, isn't this odd? Why should it be a fast of the firstborn? It should be a feast of the firstborn. The firstborn should be grateful and should celebrate the fact that the firstborn among the Egyptians died, the firstborn among the Hebrews lived. So that should be a reason for joy, not for self-abnegation and fasting. For whatever the reason, though, it is observed as a fast day. But again, as you probably know, it has become widespread practice to essentially cancel the fast, or if you want to say avoid the fast, through attending a Seudas mitzvah. That's a repast of a mitzvah variety. So if you're invited to a Pidyon Haben on that day, that's great timing, or maybe a bris possibly. Weddings are not very common on that day, but what a Seudas mitzvah that can be engineered with relative ease is a Siyum Masechta, to celebrate the conclusion of the study of a tractate of the Talmud. And this is a celebration. You could say a minor celebration. In some cases, maybe it's a major celebration, a major accomplishment. In any case, the halacha is that one who participates in such a Su'udah, such a repast, even if it's a modest or light repast, is considered to have eaten at a Seudas mitzvah. And by that token, that can overshadow the fast, and he can break his fast already in the morning. And once he's eaten in the morning, he doesn't have to fast any longer. I think he doesn't have to fast, but it's interesting that according to the Sephardim, I'm not saying that this is universally practiced, but firstborn women fast as well. Quite interesting, actually, because usually women are not that keen on fasting, and halakhically there are various circumstances where women are not required to fast in accordance with the woman's personal circumstances. But it's interesting that some have the minhag that the firstborn girls also fast for the Tanis B'choros. By the way, a father who is not a firstborn himself, but he has a firstborn son. So until the son is 13 and is responsible to fast in his own right, it's customary that the father fasts on behalf of the son. Or, as I said, the father makes a point of attending a siyum. It's one of the reasons I was happy when our firstborn Saadia turned 13, that I didn't have that sort of duty hanging over. I just mentioned one last personal reminisce. My father, Zichron Levracha, was a firstborn, and he used to love Pesach, look forward to Pesach very much, prepare a lot for Pesach. We had a lot of guests at the Seder, and it was one of his very precious opportunities in the course of the year to invite guests and to share the Pesach experience. He was very busy on Erev Pesach. Although he was a firstborn, he sometimes didn't have a chance to go to a siyum because we didn't have a siyum in my hometown, and he would actually fast one of the few people that I know who would actually fast on the Tanis B'cholos, the whole day till the Seder. Obviously, you drink wine and then more wine before you get anything to eat. But yeah, that's what he used to do. Not every year, but sometimes. Actually, I can tell you that someone who is in a circumstance where he cannot attend the Siyum, there are other strategies. You don't have to necessarily fast. If you want, we can talk about them at an opportune juncture. Okay, so the fast of the firstborn is on Thursday. At Kesher, we daven at 7 o'clock. There will be a Siyum afterwards, and whoever is present at the Siyum can celebrate and will have something to eat and doesn't have to fast later on in the day. Now, last year, the whole country, much of the world was on lockdown. Britain was in a severe, shocking lockdown, something that we had never experienced in our lifetimes, just before Pesach. I will reflect on that further a bit later on. And the shuls were not open, certainly not officially. And many people, including myself, we participated in a Siyum virtually via Zoom or other remote methods. It's interesting, the poskim discussed that in previous years, and many held that one is not yotze, one does not fulfill his, it's not really an obligation, but it's not considered participating in the Siyum if you only hear it on telephone or in some other remote method. However, last year, and I'm saying this for this current year as well, those who are unable to attend the Siyum because they're in quarantine, because they're in isolation, because they are still exercising a great prudence, caution for whatever set of reasons, and therefore it is not practical or not appealing for them to attend in person, then one can rely on those opinions that participating in a Siyum via Zoom is also sufficient. So at Kesher, we're going to be broadcasting that on the Zoom link, the Kesher Minyan link. Actually, you can use the same link that you used for tonight as well. And that is for anyone who would like to participate in the Siyum is welcome to do so in that way. I'm sure there are other Siyum options that will be available on a similar basis, but by all means, you can certainly join us at Kesher. The Siyum will be sometime around 7:45 probably on that morning, Thursday, 25th of March. Okay, moving on. Thursday evening, therefore, is the time of Vidikas Chametz. Again, normally it would be the night of Erev Pesach, that is to say, the night preceding the morning of Erev Pesach. But that is Friday night, so we can't walk around with a candle searching for chametz on a Friday night, and therefore this is accomplished on Thursday night. The time for that is around 7:10 at nightfall, and I hope that you will have certainly made arrangements to designate either a personal arrangement to sell your chametz to a non-Jewish neighbor or acquaintance, or as is much more commonly the case, to designate a rabbi to be your agent to sell your chametz on your behalf. He's not going to buy your chametz, but he will accept your instructions to sell your chametz, and with a bit of luck, he will be able to buy the chametz back after Yom Tov. And this is a very widespread, nearly universal method of fulfilling the mitzvah of expunging chametz from our possession. Nevertheless, we also make use of the method of searching for chametz. By the way, if you just type in chametz to Google, that is not called searching for chametz, not in terms of the mitzvah anyway. So you've got to actually seek it out, and whatever pasta, cereal, spirits, whiskey, that sort of thing you may have that you are not inclined to completely consume or give away or discard or destroy or burn, you can make use of the method of Mecheres Chametz, and everyone is encouraged to do so. And again, if you would like me to be your agent, the same email that I mentioned earlier was sent earlier today, around 2 o'clock today. You can find it in your inbox, or heaven forfend, in your spam file. You will find the link there for the form for Mecheres Chametz as well. Again, other rabbis certainly perform that service also. I'm happy to help if you'd like me to do so. Okay, now by the time we get to Thursday evening, the chametz, as I said, should have been completely localized within your home, if not completely, as I say, consumed, destroyed, etc. However, as I mentioned earlier, expunged, good word, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, though, we do have the not inconsiderable consideration of Shabbos, and therefore we'll talk soon about what to do with regard to Shabbos. So the search for chametz should be accomplished, as I said, around 7:10. We don't need to review that in detail; it's quite well known. I would just point out, though, should not be just a perfunctory walk around the house with a candle. By the way, you can use a torch or a flashlight. If you like Israel, you've got one on your phone, easy access now. And it's many suggest using the candle for reasons of tradition, and it's mentioned in the Talmud. There may be some symbolism to that as well, but you can use a torch also, an electric torch, what we call a flashlight in America, again, to more thoroughly illuminate the space that you're searching. It should be a thorough search, even though, as I said, surely you will have already ensured that the chametz has been removed prior to that, but it should be a thorough sort of last confirmation that the chametz has been completely removed. And many have the meaning of putting out pieces of chametz, of bread, or Cheerios or something like that, 10 of them. Just be sure, if you put out 10, be sure you find 10 as well. If you only find 9, then you've got a problem. Okay, afterward, there is a bracha that we say before B'dikas chametz, al biur chametz, because searching for chametz is the first part or the marks the beginning of the process of expunging the chametz. The chametz will be burned the next day, but we make the bracha bir chametz, and afterwards there's a declaration that we say in Aramaic. By all means, say it in English if your Aramaic is rusty. It's important that a person understands what he's saying. That's why it was written in Aramaic, so that even the unlearned would understand that was the lingua franca of the Jewish people in Talmudic times, and it was the language of the common man, even those who were not necessarily fluent or learned with regard to Lashon HaKodesh. Of course, now it's been a hafochu that many of us can understand Hebrew, but Aramaic is much more of a mysterious tongue for us. But as I said, by all means, use English, use Yiddish, or a language that you understand. You can find it, I'm sure, in your Haggadah. Okay, Friday should be in practice treated like Erev Pesach, which is to say that chametz should be very much an endangered species in your home. If you want to eat something chametz for breakfast, you may do so. We do burn the chametz on Friday. The reason we burn the chametz, even though there will still be chametz for Shabbos, which we're going to talk about shortly, the reason is that we don't want to create confusion in our own minds, our own recollection, or that of our children or visitors, guests, those who are maybe not proficient in Jewish practice, and they see that this year there's no burning of the chametz, and therefore they might say, well, we don't have to do it next year either, and therefore, although strictly speaking, the person could burn the chametz any time on Friday because it's not really Erev Pesach, but we don't want to create confusion, and therefore it's proper to burn the chametz or to formally and officially remove the last vestiges of the chametz other than Shabbos before 11:04 a.m. And that's what I have in that little essay that I have produced, which I'm actually using as a basis for my discussion right now. So the burning, now I keep saying burning the chametz. Is it required to burn the chametz? It's not actually required, but the Shulchan Aruch recommends it. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and there again is a symbolic reason for that as well. So I would say that you definitely should burn your chametz, even if you just take literally one Cheerio and you put it in a small piece of newspaper and you just light it and you burn it in that way. That it would be proper to fulfill the mitzvah of bir chametz. You need to do it in a way which is safe. If you have a lot of chametz, you don't need to burn it all. You can discard most of it and only burn whatever symbolic amount. You don't have to have necessarily even a kazayas necessarily that way, but it is proper to burn some of the chametz, at least to fulfill the mitzvah of biur chametz, to destroy it with fire. As I said, other methods of removing the chametz are certainly acceptable and recommended, but one should also one should burn some of the chametz as well. Now, let's talk about the possibilities for, Ruthie's just reminding me, to mention, the Mishnah Berurah mentions the aravos. If you have aravos left over from Sukkos, or from Hoshana Rabbah maybe, then by that many months that have passed, it will have dried out, and it makes good tinder for the fire. It's not just a matter of convenience, it's a matter of using something for a mitzvah on Sukkot and connecting it to the mitzvah of Erev Pesach as well. Since one has used that, one can use a lulav as well. If you're only burning a few Cheerios, you don't need your whole lulav, but if you're burning a lot more, which we do sometimes, then you can take some of the lulav, if you've saved it, obviously, and you can use it in that way. Okay, someone is asking me about how to discard the chametz. So in the days before Pesach, actually the Barnet Council is collecting, I think, on Friday for our benefit, a special collection, and you can have the council, you pay your council tax month by month, so get good value from it, and they will collect on the designated time and the day. If you live in one of the appropriate streets, they'll collect your chametz for you, put it in a black bin bag, and off it goes. If that's not available to you, then it's best to discard it in a way which is taking it off of your property. If you have a loaf of bread, you don't need it, and you put it in your bin, it's still on your property. Now, there are those who say, and that's mentioned in my notes as well, that because the curbside bins belong to the council, so whatever goes in there is considered out of your property, even if the bin itself is on your property. And once you put it in there, it indicates that you're discarding it, that you don't require, you don't want it, you're distancing yourself from it. Plus, technically, it belongs to the council, so one can rely on that. I would add that especially on Shabbat, which we'll talk about very soon, it may be the best option, to rely on that. We'll talk about other possibilities, but basically, you should try to get the chametz out of your property entirely. Here, for those who know where we live on Finchley Road, we have a bus stop across the street from us, and there is a municipal rubbish repository, not very large, but we go on Erev Pesach, we make use of it. Whatever we haven't burned or otherwise consumed or given away or destroyed, we always deposit there, and in that way, it's disposed of, properly. Hope I'm not being antisocial by saying if you have a non-Jewish neighbor and he has a bin, just put a bit of chametz in there. Hopefully he won't object, and it won't be anything that is considered gauche. But it's best to ensure the chametz is out of your property entirely. We'll talk in a few minutes.
Oh, excuse me. As it is Shabbat, it may be.
Yeah, we're talking about Friday so far. We're talking about Friday. We'll talk about Shabbat in a moment. Yeah, we're talking about, for now, we're talking just about Friday. So as I said, we're treating it like it's now, the subtext of what I've said for the last 10, 15 minutes is that on Shabbos, yes, there is a mitzvah to have lechem mishnah, and that's the right thing to do. That's the proper thing to do. But it's recommended that the rest of the food that you eat for yourself, for your family, guests, if you're really that way inclined, it's probably not legal actually, so scrap that. But whatever you serve should be kasher lePesach on Shabbos, Erev Pesach, including Friday night as well. You serve it in Pesach utensils, you prepare it in your Pesach crockery, etc. Now, let's talk finally about what we do for Lechem Mishnah. So Lechem Mishnah, we normally use challah. You can use bagel, you can use pita, you can use a challah roll, and any of those options are acceptable. What is quite important, though, and it's not any great Talmudic insight, try to estimate how much you, other members of your household, will eat of challah itself, and don't buy or provide more than that. If you want to be a bit more exacting, consider the halachically appropriate amount, which is only about half a bagel would be enough for the minimum amount to eat. In terms of saying Allah tilas yadayim, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, birchas hamazon afterwards, if you were to have approximately half a bagel, that would be sufficient. I'm not saying you can't have more, but if you think, well, there's so much good food to eat here, and all of that, those carbohydrates over Pesach, let me just exercise a bit of restraint on Shabbos, then I would say about half a bagel is the appropriate amount. However, I have another suggestion. It's not my own incl, discussed in the Halakhah literature, actually an interesting subject as we'll take up right now. There is something called matzah ashira. Matzah ashira is literally enriched matzah. In English, for whatever the reason, it's colloquially known as egg matzah. And you can buy it in any kosher purveyor. You can buy kasher lepesach matzah, and you can buy kasher lepesach egg matzah. Now, egg matzah is what is known in the Shulchan Aruch as matzah ashira, and it is enriched usually either with eggs, or it's made with egg whites, or it is made with fruit juice. So instead of kneading the flour with water, which is, of course, the recipe for matzah, the flour is kneaded with apple juice or something like that. And that changes the matzah to what's known as egg matzah. Now, just parenthetically, and it is pertinent to our discussion, usually if you have such a type of matzah, you would say the bracha borei minei mezonos. This is similar essentially to cake, and although this is exactly like cake, but it's softer, sweeter, maybe a little bit easier to digest than classic matzah. It's called matzah ashira. The interesting thing is that matzah ashira, one cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Seder night with matzah ashira. Not only that, but according to the Ramah, and I'm thinking that many of the people on this Zoom call, perhaps most of us, are Ashkenazim, the Ramah says that our minhag, and he didn't make it up, it was already for hundreds of years, the minhag in Ashkenazic lands is that we don't eat matzah ashira on Pesach. We consider that it might not be completely kasher lePesach. The reason for that is a bit complex because of the possibility that the fruit juice, the fructose, might cause the flour to ferment more quickly, and therefore it's difficult to ensure, maybe even, okay, I wouldn't say impossible, it's difficult to ensure that it has not become chametz, and therefore in Ashkenazic lands we don't have matzah ashira on Pesach at all, except, and that's explicit in the Ramah, except for those who are elderly or someone who is weak, someone who has digestive problems. Such a person is allowed to eat matzah ashira, even according to our minhag Ashkenaz, which means that it's a kind of unusual hybrid. It is not chametz according to the basic halakhah, because it's only astringency that the Ramah mentions. And someone who needs to eat it, not that his life is threatened, but he can't digest regular matzah, he's allowed to eat, or she's allowed to eat matzah ashira on Pesach, even according to the minhag of the Ramah. But for a normal healthy person, this is not recommended, and this is the this is why we don't normally eat matzah ashira on Pesach at all. Now, and therefore we also don't eat matzah ashira after the end of the time for eating chametz on Erev Pesach. So now we're talking about Shabbos. Shabbos, the latest time to eat chametz on Shabbos Erev Pesach is 10 a.m. Easy to remember, 10 a.m. There are some who even use an earlier time, but we're recommending 10 a.m. is the latest time to eat chametz on Erev Pesach. That applies to matzah ashira as well. However, because matzah ashira applies to matzah ashira. However, because matzah ashira is not outright chametz, one can use matzah ashira, egg matzah, instead of lechem mishnah, and actually that is what I would recommend. So don't have any chametz, actual chametz in your home at all. Only use matzah ashira. Now, someone has asked about the minhag that we don't have matzah on Erev Pesach. That's actually in the Shulchan Aruch. We don't have matzah even. Many have the minhag from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and it's actually become quite common that some people don't have matzah even from Purim, and that was what I grew up with. We didn't have matzah even before. When I began to learn, I saw that there's not that minhag is not mentioned in any of the sources. Then later on, I learned even a bit more, and I found it is hinted to in some places. And there are many who have such a minhag. They don't have matzah for 30 days from Purim until Pesach. And the minhag not to have from Rosh Chodesh is again mentioned very widespread, although that's not halachic requirement. Here's the point though. The kind of matzah that one should not have on Erev Pesach, even from the morning, by the way, of Erev Pesach, even early in the morning, is the type of matzah that you can eat at the Seder to fulfill the mitzvah of achilas matzah. So matzah ashira, we have explained, according to Ashkenazic practice, we actually don't normally eat it at all on Pesach. And even according to the Sephardic practice, they definitely do not eat it at the Seder to fulfill matzah's mitzvah. That has to be, you know, the expression lechem oni. Lechem oni is the bread of poverty or the bread of affliction. Matzah ashira is the bread which is enriched. So if it's enriched, then it's certainly not the bread of poverty. So matzah ashira is not acceptable to fulfill the mitzvah on the Seder night. By the same token, I hope I'm not confusing you, matzah ashira may be consumed on the days before Pesach, even on Erev Pesach itself, until 10 a.m. So my recommendation is don't use challah, don't use pita, don't use bagels. You may, but then you've got a problem with the crumbs. Use matzah ashira. Matzah ashira, because the idea that it's considered chametz is only astringency. One does not have to be as obsessive about or as meticulous about removing every last crumb. Having said that, to the extent that it's practical to do so, one should try to avoid getting the matzah ashira, the egg matzah, on your Pesach utensils, Pesach crockery and cookery and that sort of thing. So if you have access to a separate table, or if you can use like a serviette or something, so you can eat the matzah that way. Whatever crumbs are from the matzah, and of course matzah does produce crumbs, you just dispose of it. Now, a few questions people are asking me, good questions. How much matzah ashira should you eat? I would say one matzah. One standard size matzah would be plenty, would be more than enough. If that's too much for you, you can eat 1/2 of matzah ashira, egg matzah. It's easier to digest than regular matzah, and it, as I said, takes the place of the challah or the bagel. May not be as tasty, but that is what I would suggest. So a 1/2 of matzah ashira would be minimally enough. It's proper. I would recommend having one egg matzah. So if you're buying for your family, you need for Friday night, you need for Shabbos morning the same. Now it is true that we normally say barei minei mezonos on egg matzah, based on what I had said a little while ago. But because we're eating it here on Shabbos, and we're eating it in place of lechem mishnah, actually it's not in place of, but it is fulfilling lechem mishnah for us. So the matzah ashira, here we'll say the bracha motzi lechem in haaretz. Someone's asking me, can you eat it throughout the day of Pesach? No, only until 10 a.m. Only until the last time for eating chametz on Erev Pesach, which is 10 a.m. So Friday night, of course, you got no problem, but Shabbos morning only until 10 a.m. I would just mention, so we mentioned the quantity, we mentioned the bracha, it's hamotzi lechem in haaretz in this context. At another time, we would say borei minei mezonos on it, but in this context we say hamotzi lechem in haaretz. So the crumbs, what do you do with the crumbs on Shabbos? Okay, so let's talk about that. So according to this formula, you won't have many chametz crumbs to dispose of at this point, because already on Friday you've removed it, you've burned whatever Cheerios and other last Weetabix fragments, you may have left. You do have the egg matzah, which, as we keep saying, is not really chametz, but we do treat it with the stringency of chametz, as we've been discussing. The last crumbs that you have, you can just shake it into the toilet, is a method which you can use. If one does have more chametz than that, you can even pour some bleach on it. Bleach, is, of course, renders it inedible, even to a dog, and that would be another way of destroying it. Now, those who have the convenience of living within an eruv can also take it outside and put it in a municipal bin if you have access to it, or your neighbor's bin, as I said, if it's not antisocial to do so, or even in your own bin if need be, as I've indicated, according to those who are lenient in that regard. If you don't have the convenience of an eruv, which was the case here in Golders Green even until about 15, 18 years ago, then you got to do it, as I said, either down the toilet or in the bleach or something like that. Those methods would also be acceptable. But again, if you have matzah ashira, egg matzah, then the anxiety is greatly diminished because of that, since it's not actually chametz, even though we do try to avoid getting it on the Pesach utensils, etc. Now, many have pointed out, again, if it's practical for you to do so, if you can set the table, okay, we have to, going back to Friday, a good idea to set the table for the Seder on Friday, because the Seder Pesach arrives as Shabbos ends. It's proper and also prudent to get the Seder underway in timely fashion, and therefore, just looking at the questions here. Just answer a question because I may forget it. Just about this 10 a.m. Actually, let's turn to that separately in one moment. We'll get back to that. I was saying that we want to start the Seder promptly when Shabbos ends, even though it's relatively early this year because the clocks have not yet changed, which is uncommon. But we have actually the convenience that Shabbos ends at 7:17 on Erev Pesach, or Leil Pesach, really, and therefore it's possible to get the Seder underway shortly thereafter, but only if the table is already set. So you need to set, if it's possible, if it's practical for you to set the table in the dining room and then to eat your meals in another space, whether in the kitchen or whatever may be practical for you, if that can be achieved, then that is a good idea. Also, some of the other preparations cannot be done on Shabbos for the Seder, like even grating the moror, that sort of thing. There are things which cannot be done on Shabbos. In any case, even setting the table cannot be done on Shabbos because it's preparation for after Shabbos. So if one is able to do those preparations before and set the table before, and the table is all prepared for the Seder night, that is excellent, and you can eat your Shabbos meals in another space if it's available to you. I have a friend, a colleague in Southern Florida, and I just was looking at his notes, and he is recommending a very lovely idea, which is sorry, I just want to read it because it brought a smile to my lips. Yes. Yeah, he says another suggestion would be to eat the entire meal outside on the patio, and that you can do if you live in Southern California or Southern Florida. Yeah, so that's great. It's a great idea for Southern Florida. You know, they also have air conditioning in their sukkahs in Southern Florida as well, but we don't have that situation exactly. So I've been asked about the timing of Shachris. So Shachris is going to be at Kesher at 7 o'clock. There are other places where they're davening even earlier. Actually, we're davening at 7. We'll finish around 9, hopefully a little bit before even. And the 10 o'clock threshold, a few people have asked me about this. That's the time when you have to finish eating the chametz. So if you make kiddush, come home, you make kiddush, let's say 9:15, even 9:30, you make kiddush, you wash for hamotzi, you make the bracha motzi lechem and haaretz, you eat your kazayis, which we're recommending like one full egg matzah, which actually more, it's probably a kabeya or even more than that. You don't have to bench by 10 o'clock. You just have to finish eating the chametz. It would be advisable to either rinse your mouth or something like that. So you're finished eating chametz by 10 o'clock. Don't push it to the last minute, not recommended. And then you can eat the rest of the meal at your leisure. Now, in terms of the menu, of course, it's a matter of personal choice, but there is a halachic consideration here as well. If you have something that we might consider like a kiddush at shul, the kind of sort of light repast that you might have, or breakfast if you like, then that is one approach. And you can just have fish, you can have fruit, you can have vegetables, you can have cheese, you can have that sort of meal because it's still quite early. I mean, even if you are not going to bench at 10 o'clock and you still eat until 11 o'clock, still, quite early for a main meal, but obviously that's a matter of personal taste. Now, I've been asked about Suda Shishit, and of course that is part of our program here as well. I just want to make a comment, though, about the fact I mentioned earlier that this is a what we might consider, what we colloquially call a 3-day Yom Tov. We have Shabbos followed by 2 days of Yom Tov. Because of that, requires quite a lot of planning. What are you going to eat? What are you going to serve? What has been prepared? What are you intending to prepare on Yom Tov itself, or to heat up on Yom Tov, which of course one is allowed to do. But remember that we've got Shabbos before Yom Tov, and on Shabbos a person is not supposed to use an oven. Now, I'm choosing my words carefully because there are circumstances in which one may be able to use the oven to keep food warm on Shabbos. Certainly on Yom Tov, one has a bit more latitude, but the pitfalls are numerous. The technology is advancing all the time, and even if you don't have the top of the range, latest cutting edge, computer controlled, GPS enabled oven, it often will have features that make it quite Shabbos unfriendly. There is a Shabbos mode, and recently you may be aware that some of those ovens that were sold with a Shabbos mode, actually they don't really work for Shabbos, they don't work so well for Yom Tov even, and therefore my suggestion generally is don't rely, if you can, get by with it, don't rely on your oven on Yom Tov, certainly not on Yom Tov, even Yom Tov is complex, and Shabbos is highly problematic to use an oven in a halakhically acceptable way on Shabbos. And therefore, there's no Erev Tavshilin. I've just been asked about. No, Erev Tavshilin is pertinent when Yom Tov precedes Shabbos. When Shabbos precedes Yom Tov, then Erev Tavshilin is not pertinent. Erev Tavshilin enables one to prepare from Yom Tov on Friday for Shabbos. But the converse, there's no mechanism for that, to prepare on Shabbos for Yom Tov. And as we've said, one is quite restricted in that regard. So some, as I said, have made use of ovens in various ways, but one has to be, I'm mentioning it now in particular in the context of this discussion, because even if you do use your oven on Yom Tov, but you're quite limited in how you can use it on Shabbos. So I would say make use of a blech or a hot plate, which many people use. We have home, we have a large one, we have a larger one still. Consider how much you need. I don't know what the circumstances are of everybody on this call. Our expectations for this Pesach in terms of members of the family or guests is greatly diminished from what it has been in the past, and therefore, the pressure on the kitchen from that point of view is somewhat diminished as well. Okay, let's talk about the timing of 10 o'clock is the last time to eat chametz, but one should also annul the chametz, and he should do that, or she should do that, on Shabbos morning before 11 o'clock. So on Friday, although we burn the chametz on Friday, we don't make the further declaration of the nullification, because we're still going to need chametz and eat, or still we have the possibility of eating chametz Friday night and Shabbos morning as well. So the nullification that we usually say at the time of burning the chametz is delayed until the actual Erev Pesach, which is on Shabbos. So after you finish eating your egg matzah before 10 o'clock, at that time or shortly thereafter, crack open your Haggadah, or you can find it in your Seder as well, I think page 654 in the Art Scroll Seder, and say the declaration for the nullification of chametz, which we say at the time of the actual, prior to the actual prohibition of owning chametz. And that, again, is important to say that at that time. Okay, Shalasudis is another interesting question. The reason it's interesting is that it's not possible to fulfill Sudah Shishit in the ideally preferred way, because the ideal way to fulfill the mitzvah of Sudah Shishit is to have bread at Sudah Shishit and to eat it in the afternoon. Now, one cannot do that on this particular Shabbos, because Shabbos afternoon we definitely cannot eat bread. It's also min haTorah already to eat bread on the afternoon after midday on Erev Pesach. Matzah we also can't eat, because we don't eat matzah on all of Erev Pesach, if it's a real matzah. Matzah ashira, egg matzah, according to the minhag Ashkenaz, we don't eat egg matzah on Shabbos either. So we're stymied. We can't fulfill the mitzvah of Sudah Shishit in the ideally preferred way. What we can do, if a person wants to, is to eat Sudah Shishit before 10 a.m. So you can eat breakfast super early, and then you can go for a walk around the block, and then you can have Seudah Shishit and do all of that before 10 a.m. There are some people maybe who are going down that route, and more power to them. But even if one does that, and you can eat Seudah Shishit with, theoretically, with bread, if you want, before 10 o'clock, or with matzah shira, the egg matzah, but you're eating it in the morning, you're supposed to eat ideally in the afternoon. So therefore, most people just take the point of view that since it's not possible to fulfill it in the ideal way, we'll fulfill it in a way which is halachically valid, fulfills the mitzvah, and that is to eat Seudah Shishit in the afternoon, and without bread, and without matzah, and without hamotzi lechem in aretz. Mazonos, you could just about say, if you want to eat knedlach, which is what we've mentioned, matzah meal, which is not baked, but which is boiled or cooked, like knedlach, one can eat that on Erev Pesach. But many people will just stay away from that, any kind of matzah-related product, on Erev Pesach. And therefore, Seudah Shishit can be basically anything but bread. Now, you can take the approach, which some have recommended, that you get up early, you daven early, you come to kasher or whatever your local minyan is. Even if you're not going to shul, you daven in the proper way, in the right time. That is to say, the early time. You eat your seudah to fulfill the mitzvah of lechem mishin, the way that we've described. You have a light repast. You say Birkas HaMazon, which doesn't have to be before 10, as we said. You can then take a break, take a nap, which is a lovely opportunity, which normally does not present itself on Erev Pesach. A nap to be able to relax, or even just to sit down and learn, or to do something which is sort of enjoying in a serene, tranquil environment on Erev Pesach. Such a thing very difficult to achieve in a normal year. When you've got Shabbos, even though we've gone to a lot of effort that we've been talking about, but there's a payoff. So therefore you can relax, and if you want to eat lunch, which is a more full, nourishing meal, you can do so. And if you eat that meal after 12:30, that is to say, even if you begin it before, but if you continue until after 12:30, that can also fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah Shishit at that time as well. So Ruthie is mentioning that some have the minhag of saying the Haggadah as well, Shabbos afternoon on Erev Pesach, until from Avadim Hayinu. They say the Haggadah at that time. Some don't, because it says Balaylahu. The Vilna Gaon was not in favor of that minhag, but many do. Many do. It's mentioned I think the Ramah already mentions it. So yes, there are lots of good things you can do on this Shabbos of Erev Pesach to prepare for the Seder, and to derive the maximum benefit and joy and inspiration from it, which we'll actually talk about in a few minutes as well. So I hope that we've covered most of what we need to in this regard. Of course, the Yom Tov candles are only lit after Shabbos ends at 7:17, and now, I don't want to use the word confusion, but I would like to just say I would like to add a footnote to the following observation. The halacha is that it's proper not to eat a meal after the 10th hour of Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov. For those who were with us on discussion regarding Purim, so this year, not by coincidence, because they always go together, Purim fell on Friday, and it was necessary to find a way to have the Purim Seudah on Erev Shabbos as well. And this is why many people, Simons as well, had our Purim Seudah beginning it before noon. That is the recommended approach. The other approaches as well. The person doesn't get around to it, he doesn't have time, and he's only eating the Seudah later. So it's preferable to start the Purim Seudah or any other let's say, formal, maybe even lavish meal at before the 10th hour, which is about 4:15 in London this year. Before 4:15, according to my notes. Yeah, before 4:15. So the good books will say that you should, if you want to eat something in the afternoon, eat it before 4:15. I want to clarify that. It's not prohibited to eat anything after 4:15. It just means a full set meal is not ideal to begin after 4:15. But I would like to say, on the contrary, I'm going out on a limb, but I'm recommending you should eat something after 4:15, even later in the afternoon. Because the reason that we don't want to eat a lavish meal is that you won't have an appetite for Shabbos if it's Erev Shabbos, or here for the Seder, and especially for the matzahs mitzvah. One should eat it to te'avon with an appetite. But if your Seder is anything like my Seder, you're not going to eat at the stroke of 7:17. You're not going to make Kiddush then. Even if you make Kiddush at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, by the time you get to the meal after the Magid and the four questions and the discussion, the elaboration, the inspiration, etc., you're not going to be able to eat anything substantial. The karpas is less than a kazayas. I'm not really counting, doesn't count for that much until much later, maybe 10 o'clock, maybe later than that even. Which means that if you don't eat anything from, let's say, 4 o'clock until 10 o'clock, you're going to be very hungry. You've had 2 cups of wine as well, by the way. So I think that really there's no great merit in avoiding eating anything so that you have an appetite. Under normal circumstances, I would expect a person will have ample appetite, and actually it's sensible to have, you can have fish, you can have potatoes, you can have fruit, you can have vegetables, and that sort of thing. Yeah, Ruthie's recommending sweet potatoes because they've got low GI, and she's going to share the menu, the recipe with whoever would like. Sweet potatoes, yeah, it's great. We use it Erev Pesach, we eat it, and we also eat it on Erev Yom Kippur. But Erev Yom Kippur, we have a lavish repast for obvious reasons. But yeah, the sweet potatoes are a good idea. Someone asked me a question. I saw in the notes and I forgot the right. I'm sorry. Right. The lighting of Yom Tov candles and when Shabbos ends. It's important that whoever lights candles, whether a man or a woman or a woman for that matter, should daven Ma'ariv first. And if not, because many women do not daven Ma'ariv, even very devout women, including women very close to me, who are very righteous, they don't necessarily daven Ma'ariv every time, but he or she should say Baruch HaMavdil Bein Kodesh LeKodesh. It's a beautiful turn of phrase. We don't have a chance to say it very often. Blessed is he who distinguishes between holy and holy, between Kodesh LeKodesh, the holiness of Shabbos and the holiness of Yom Tov. That is the counterpart to Baruch HaMavdil Bein Kodesh LeChol. It's important to say that because otherwise Shabbos hasn't been formally brought to a close, and therefore one who is not going to daven Ma'ariv, for example, should say Baruch HaMavdil Bein Kodesh LeKodesh before lighting the Yom Tov candles at that time. Okay, I would just end with a few further comments before we turn to the Haggadah inspiration. The Seder has finally arrived. The age-old story of the deliverance from Mitzrayim is recounted anew. And again, we are told that we must think of ourselves as having personally experienced the redemption. I have some reflections on that, which I'll share with you in a short while. May the effort that we have put into preparing for Pesach this year against the backdrop of 12 months of global contagion be amply rewarded by the satisfaction we derive from it. May it imbue us with a sense of renewal at the time of year when nature itself begins to reawaken. And may it inspire us with even greater loyalty to our faith and commitment to the values which Judaism has given to the world, which have ensured our survival and which have indeed brought us from slavery to freedom. Someone has asked about preparing thoughts on the Seder on Shabbos. Is that considered preparing for after Shabbos? It's a very good question. I like that question because, strictly speaking, if a person were to intend to review his notes or study something that he can share with the family, only so that he'll be able to do it after Shabbos, then probably would not be meritorious to do so, would not be meritorious. However, there's a very excellent solution, And that is, a person should simply have in mind that I'm studying the Torah for its own sake. I'm enjoying it, I'm learning from it, I'm getting inspiration, guidance from it for its own sake. I'm also going to be able to share it with others at the Seder. And if I read the 2 pages and I found a paragraph that's especially meaningful, that's great. It doesn't mean that I'm, so to speak, uh, diminishing the sanctity of Shabbos by preparing for afterwards. So the answer is one can definitely use the time to prepare for the Seder, but should have in mind, I'm also doing this for its own sake. Nancy has pointed us something very important, and that is that when you light Shabbos candles on Friday afternoon, you should also light a long candle that will burn throughout Shabbos and indeed for the days of Yom Tov as well. So you can get a 3-day candle or longer even, and that is very useful to have, because otherwise, Motzai Shabbos, you'll have difficulty lighting the candles for Yom Tov. Excuse me, you need those candles for Yom Tov candles. We need it for a bit of Havdalah at the Seder as well, the famous Yak Nahaz, which you'll find in your Haggadah. So absolutely, a long candle is very important to have on this in anticipation of the, as you say, the 3-day Yom Tov. I want to talk just briefly about, as I said at the very beginning, the unusual convergence of Pesach, especially the Yom Tov of Pesach, with the changing of the clock. So the clocks change, excuse me, technically, British summertime begins at 1 a.m. on Sunday, the 28th of March, which becomes 2 a.m. at that very moment. Just someone has asked me, I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but I don't want to forget to answer. How do we incorporate Havdalah into the Kiddush? So the Haggadah that you use will provide the sequence for you. It will say that when Shabbos, or I'm sorry, when Yom Tov, the Seder night, is Motzei Shabbos. So then we introduce, as I said before, the acronym Yakana has Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. Now the interesting thing is the candle. Normally we light a Havdalah candle. We make the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh. After we finish Havdalah, we have a little ritual. We extinguish the candle in the wine from the Havdalah, and there's certain symbolism to that. Now, we don't extinguish the candle here. Moreover, the Havdalah candle is technically a torch with more than one wick. Your Yom Tov candles probably are not that way, not recommended really, because it burns much too quickly that way. So what we like to do is to take the 2 candles, if you have, I'm sure you have at least 2, and put them together. So the one who says Kiddush holds the Kiddush cup, and another member of the family, if he has access to such a person, or a visitor, or a guest, whoever that may be, will put the 2 candles together and then carefully separate them apart. Putting them together so you have the 2 candles that join the wicks for the Borei Morei Ha'esh in the plural, and then carefully separating them, of course, without extinguishing either one of them. Strictly speaking, it's not essential to join them together. So even if the candles are separate on the table or on the side, wherever they may be, you can still say the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh at that point. And of course, we don't just extinguish them, because although one is allowed to light a flame on Yom Tov from an existing flame, but we don't extinguish a flame on Yom Tov. But one makes the bracha in that way. And that is, again, a very felicitous merging, mingling of the Havdalah and the Kiddush together, and it includes that elegant formula, Baruch HaMavdil, ben Kodesh leKodesh. We don't use Besamim because the Besamim, you probably know, is for a beautiful reason to console the soul on the departure of the additional soul. Shabbos has a Neshama Yisera. Yom Tov is a wonderful, special time, but it doesn't have a Neshama Yisera. But because of the specialness of Yom Tov, when the additional soul departs at the end of Shabbos, we don't feel that letdown. We don't feel that kind of twinge of the departure of something precious. We don't feel it because we got Yom Tov as well. So the Besamim on Motzei Shabbos we do not use when Yom Tov follows immediately after Shabbos, and we don't use it after Yom Tov either, because despite its special qualities, Yom Tov does not involve the Neshama Yisera. So we don't have the mitzvah of Besamim, Motzei Shabbos, within this Havdalah. So we just have the Yayin, the wine, the Kiddush for the Yom Tov, the bracha borei morei haish ner, the havdalah, and the zman is that last one shechianu v'kiyamanu. But as I said, you'll find it in your Haggadah. Right. Okay. This unusual. Okay, Yuki has given me a great idea for those who have artistic flair or whose children have it. Then if you have one of those long candles that you can buy, not expensive, that lasts for multiple days, maybe 7 days, you can decorate them. You can draw on them like with watercolors on the outside of the glass, and as the candle burns down day by day, then it lasts for a while, because if you use it for 3 days and then you extinguish it, you can still use it on another occasion for 2 days or whatever it might be, and then you have a kind of memento as well, which is a very, very lovely idea. Too many clever ideas, though, are keeping me from my subject. So yes, British summertime. So this creates its own difficulties. Most types of clocks, the great majority, one is not allowed to adjust on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. Electric clocks, again, etc. Some appliances that have a clock will actually adjust themselves automatically. Your phone will do that same probably as well, but you're not using your phone. You don't have access to it. It's probably not illuminated on Yom Tov. You put it away in a drawer, so that is not going to be an issue. But there is a difficulty in changing the clocks physically, and even mentally to change the clock is a bit complicated on Yom Tov. But I have another consideration as well, and this is our approach at Kesher, and that is that actually the Greenwich Mean Time, as opposed to British summertime, is advantageous when it comes to the Seder. Usually, the Seder cannot start before sometime after 8:30 or even later than that, especially the second night. But even the first night, 8:30 is usually the earliest. In practical terms, 9 o'clock or even later than that. And the second Seder often doesn't get underway till 10 o'clock or later, even the very beginning of it. So the fact that we are on Greenwich Mean Time, the winter clock, so to speak, on the first night of Pesach, we feel it's useful, it's advantageous to maintain that for the second night as well. So we are deliberately extending the Greenwich Mean Time for an extra day. So at Kesher, we're not changing our clocks. We're not regretting that we can't adjust the clocks in our home. We're going to daven at 9 a.m. on the first day of Yom Tov and the second day of Yom Tov, according to the Greenwich Mean Time. We're not changing our clocks until Matzai Yom Tov. And there's nothing seditious about this. The timing is only a matter of convenience. And insofar as we are arranging our own sort of schedule within the Jewish community, within Kesher Kehila, in this instance, again, we're not disadvantaging anyone else. I suppose if you've got a cleaner coming to help you at a certain time, so you might just have to bear that in mind. Tell her which time you're using. Maybe tell her the time according to the new British summertime. But in terms of our programming at Kesher and our davening times, we're keeping the Greenwich Mean Time just for the extra day or two. And this is actually, as I say, a convenience. We're not actually saving time because we're starting the Seder an hour earlier, but we're davening an hour earlier than we might otherwise be davening. But we're having that benefit and that advantage. So basically, we are exploiting the opportunity that presents itself for the fact that Pesach falls, the first part of Pesach is at the end of March. Okay, that is what I wanted to share with you with regard to the special halachos pertinent to Yom Tov and to Pesach this year. We had planned that this seminar will last for about an hour and a half, so I do have a bit of time still for those who'd like to join us for the some Haggadah inspiration. Actually, I apologize because I also wanted to leave some time for Pesach questions as well. In terms of the time for Matzai Yom Tov, so again, if you're coming to Kesher, or even if you're not, you can make use of this. You can find the link again in the email that we sent earlier today. So we are scheduling Yom Tov as ending on the second night of Yom Tov at 7:20 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So again, those on the British summertime will be and only at 8:20. But we're staying with Greenwich Mean Time, so Yom Tov will end at 7:20, the second day of Yom Tov on Monday night. Also, that means that the time for eating afikomen will be like 12:05 instead of 1:05, etc. So I think we'll have the benefit of enabling the Seder to get underway at an earlier hour, which I think is beneficial for most people at least. But obviously, that's a personal choice. Okay, we have a few minutes still for some Seder inspiration, which I hope that we can enjoy that together. So let's talk about a few comments from some of the popular and well-known passages in the Haggadah. I'd like to start with the four sons, very well known. Keneged Arba Banim Divra Torah. The Torah addresses four types of sons. What's interesting is it says Echad Chacham, Ve'echad Rasha, Ve'echad Tam, Ve'echad She'eno Yodea Lishol. Now, why does the author of Haggadah have to say Echad, 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 Echad? Why not just say Keneged Arba Banim, corresponding to four sons of the Torah speak, Chacham, Rasha, Tam, She'eno Yodea Lishol. Why repeat one and one and one and one? If there are four, and we mentioned four, when we know there's one of each. So Rav Zalman Saratskin says the Torah here is saying that a father, a parent, has a duty, a responsibility to engage every type of son. The Torah does the same. The Torah speaks to four sons. Echad, echad, it doesn't just mean one like this, one like that. It means whether the son is wise, whether the son is wicked, whether the son is simple, whether the son doesn't even know how to ask. There are four types of sons, and whichever type may be at the Seder, or maybe I should say whichever type I am at my stage in life, whatever aspect of those four sons is manifest in me or people around me, I have a duty to engage with that person, including if that person is myself, in the way that the Torah sets out. So it's a kind of inclusive perspective. Echad echad means whether wise or wicked, whatever type of son, and of course those are just paradigms, it means whatever type of son there may be. Let's talk about the Ben Rasha. He's a very interesting son. Rasha Mahu Omer. So Maha Avod Hazos Lachem, what is this service for you? And that's the words that the Torah puts into his mouth. And the Baal Haggadah says, Lachem velo lo, to you and not to him. In other words, he is addressing the father, let's say in this simple parable, and he says, what is this avod, what is this labor for you? Why are you doing it? And why are you involved in it? The implication is it's your mishagaz, it's not mine, and I'm not part of it. And therefore we say, well, he would not have even been redeemed, and we actually rebuke him. We don't really respond to him at all. The Meshech Chochmah says that of the four sons, interestingly, the various sons, the questions that they ask come from the Torah, and the response is like, it says, Va'af ata emorlo, you tell him, just reading from the Meshech Chochmah, he says, the Torah says, Tishalcha bincha lemor. When your son asks you, saying, Tishalcha bincha lemor. Now, the word lemor, saying, can be understood as hinting to the fact that the son who asks is trying to evoke a response. He's trying to elicit a response. The word saying is a bit gratuitous. It could simply say, when your son asks you. Why do we have the word lemor, saying? The implication is he is asking because he is seeking a response. He wants to evoke an answer from the father. Says the Meshech Chochmah, that's true for the other sons. But in the case of the Ben Rasha, it doesn't say lashon of she'ela, a question. He just says maha avod hazos lachem. The Torah in introducing it doesn't say when your son asks you. but it just presents the challenge presented by the Ben Rasha. So since the Ben Rasha, the wicked son, is actually not addressing a query, he's not inquiring, he actually is not posing even a question to which he seeks an answer, but he's just trying to mock, he's just trying to find the grounds to deride. So therefore, he doesn't warrant the courtesy of a response or an answer to the question, because the question is not really a question at all. The question is just the kanter, and therefore he is rebuked by way of response, as it says in the Haggadah, Hakeas Shina, blunt his teeth. I had the idea that any parent will learn or should learn or discover that children are not always the models that we imagine that we'd like them to be, just as we were not in our childhood, dare I say, certainly true for me. And therefore there are times of tension, of testing, of maybe strife or anger, etc. To alienate that son or that daughter, to drive that person away, to rebuke him rather than engage him, is a very dangerous game. It may be the natural impulse. It may be difficult to resist that response, but it's a very dangerous approach. And many parents have discovered that to their sorrow over the years, and probably in our times, not less than in earlier times. And therefore, I've always wondered, why does it say Hakeas Shina, blunt his teeth? You've got to engage him. You've got to respond to him. You've got to maybe turn him around, as many have said. It could be that, remember, we said there are 4 sons here. According to the metaphor, they're all at the table. Yes, I have a duty to that son. I want to draw him in. I want to engage with him. I want to open up lines of communication and dialogue. As many have observed, there are 4 sons of the Seder. The wicked son, at least he's there. There may be a 5th son who doesn't even rock up to the Seder. What do you say to him? He's not even there to talk to. The wicked son who's there, at least take advantage of the fact that he's there. Why do you blunt his teeth? I believe that part of the answer may be that, yes, the father has a duty to all 4 sons. And sometimes it's necessary to respond with rigor, and maybe even in a definitive, dare I say, even in a harsh way, in order to demonstrate or to illustrate for the other sons there as well. If this wicked son is aggressive, if he is taunting, if he is acting up, acting out, he can easily be an example to his brothers as well. And sometimes it may be necessary to treat him more harshly in public than might be possible or appropriate in public. It's just a thought. In private, I'm sorry, they might be appropriate in private, but in public, it's necessary to demonstrate or to uphold a certain rigor, lest he become a deleterious influence on others. Obviously, if the father rebukes him too harshly, then again, it can easily backfire. This analysis, no doubt, deserves more attention for another occasion. My favorite one, though, of these sons is She'eno Yodea Lishon, because this 4th son, it says, At petachlo. These 3 words, to me, contain within them a depth of meaning. At pesachlo. You open him up. So the Chacham, the wise son, has a question, a sophisticated question. The Rasha is taunting, perhaps, but he's got something to say for himself. The Tam, maybe he's not sophisticated, maybe he's young, but he says, Mazos, what's going on? The 4th son is maybe too young to even know, or maybe he's completely disinterested, to the point that you can't even get a rise out of him. And you're the Ali show. In my art school, youth Haggadah, he's a young child, he's falling asleep, he's got a doll with him. At pesachlo in the feminine. So let me say that at pesachlo, at is in the feminine, refers to the fact that you're a young child, so it's naturally the role of the mother to spend more time with the very young child, and her influence on the child in his formative stages is, of course, so profound. Maybe that's what it says, At Petachlo. But many years ago, I saw in the Shemi Shmuel a much more profound interpretation, which I think is very beautiful. At Petachlo, you open him up. At Petachlo. It doesn't say give him an answer. He didn't have a question. Someone who has no question, an answer will fall on deaf ears, but he's not even interested. At petachlo means you've got to arouse his interest. Why is at in the feminine? You, the father, have to adopt the role of the feminine. The feminine is the one who arouses the interest of her partner. The female seeks to stimulate and to bring to prominence, bring to expression, to arouse the curiosity, the fascination, dare I say, the desire of her partner. This is at petachlo. The one who doesn't know how to ask, you have to open him up. You have to find a way to stimulate his interest. That's why it says at in the feminine. You become feminine and find a way to prompt him to demonstrate the interest and the initiative of the male. That's at petachlo. Eno yodea lishol, who doesn't know how to ask. The word yodea is related to connection. Like it says, V'ha'adam yada es Chava ishto, that Adam knew Chava, his wife. To know in the biblical sense is to be joined together with. It has a connotation even of intimacy. At petachlo sheno yodea lishol, so you have to act towards him in such a way that arouses his interest, so that you engage with him, you connect with him. And this is the challenge of a parent, and this is the challenge of an educator, and this is the advice that the Torah gives to the one who is seeking to engage with the four sons, including the one who has nothing to say because he's not interested. Stimulate his interest, arouse his interest, draw him out, connect with him, bond with him, engage with him. You adopt the role of the feminine and see to what extent you can excite him and engage him in the rest of the Haggadah to follow. Vihisha Amda is the prelude to the actual narrative of the Haggadah, which I've got in my Haggadah here, but you can all find it. Vihisha Amda lavosenu velanu. So what is the he? What is the subject of the he? The he and this. So the simple meaning is that it refers to the promise, the Hashem promise to Abraham, and the he sha'amda, it's the promise to Abraham which stood by the side of our ancestors. And not one arose up to destroy us, but rather in every generation. V'chol dor vador, omdim aleinu lechalosenu. The simple meaning, as I said, is a reference to the promise. Others say it's a reference to the Torah. Vihi, the Vilna Gaon says Vihi. The Vav is the 6 orders of the Mishnah. The Hey is the 5 books of the Torah. Of course, the Yud is the 10 commandments, and Aleph is God Himself. Collectively, the Torah has enabled, has ensured our not only our longevity but our endurance throughout every generation when they've risen up against us. I would like to put this, if I may, some of you know I have a fondness for history in historical perspective. I would like to say that anyone who has studied history knows that there are laws of history. Not necessarily predictive, but when you look back at history, there are certain patterns that repeat themselves. There are certain laws of history. Nations come and go, empires rise and fall. The Jew defies the laws of averages. The Jewish people defy the laws of history. We have been described as an ever-dying people, and yet we're still here. We have faced threats that are physical, that are spiritual, economic, social, political, ideological in every generation. We have not necessarily contended with mortal physical threats in every generation, although there have been plenty of those. But we have definitely been faced with challenges that are dramatic in every generation, whether destruction, as I say, physically, spiritually, ideologically. Today, thankfully, we live in a time of relative or even absolute security, prosperity, a time which we are blessed with the existence of the state of Israel, which is something which our ancestors only dreamt of and prayed for throughout their lives. And yet we face perilous threats as well. In my mind, the greatest threat to us, to the Jewish people, is progressive social values that oppose marriage, that oppose shchita, that oppose milah, that oppose kavura. These essential aspects of Jewish principle and Jewish practice are steadily falling out of vogue. And in fact, they're even considered retrogressive to insist on marriage as it has existed from Adam and Eve, like someone said, not Adam and Steve, but whatever it might be, to expect norms which are no longer Jewish included in many instances, are they take a dim view of these features which are so essential to Jewish life. Shchita, a ritual slaughter, okay, consumption of meat, I've got nothing against vegetarianism, but when it becomes militant, when it manifests itself in a threat to shchita, so this is something which imperils our future. Circumcision, again, I don't want to dwell on that. Even burial. We had a few weeks ago, Rebbe Tznufi arranged a talk on burial versus cremation, and it was in many respects frightening to learn how traditional burial is steadily falling out of favor. And who knows what could happen in the future, where the opprobrium might lead even to legislation. And of course, generally progressive values today are out of vogue, and to say nothing of Zionism, which is a term of absolute opprobrium on the left. And this is a threat to us and to our children. But I'm not trying to, present a doomsday scenario. On the contrary, we have seen off every threat and every danger and every ideological and physical, economic, social, and political threat. We have overcome it, we have endured it, and through the grasping of the Torah and the love for our tradition, we will definitely prevail here as well. I just want to end, and I tell you the truth, I wanted to end on an upbeat note, but it's not completely at the end of our shir, because for those who like to ask some questions, whether it's about Hefsher Kidding, whatever it might be, I'm happy to help with that. But I did want to end with something strong, albeit slightly solemn. In every generation, a person should regard himself as if he left Mitzrayim. And somebody asked me recently, actually, whether it's only men or the women as well. To me, it's obvious. Of course, it means the women as well. The women were in Egypt. The women, the righteous women, are the reason that we were redeemed from Egypt. So the women were there. The women suffered. The women were the heroes of the Mishkan. So to me, it's obvious that this applies equally to men and to women, that every person should regard himself or herself as if she had left Mitzrayim. Not easy to fulfill that. I remember many years ago, I was when I was single, I was in yeshiva in Israel. Those days we didn't go home for Pesach. I went to, another time I'll tell you my story about that particular Pesach. Anyway, there's a fellow, young guy, a brisker, Bacher, and that little Seder, very memorable Seder. And he said this is the most difficult mitzvah to fulfill because it's not easy for a child of the 20th century. I'm dating myself back to the 20th century, that's when it was, to imagine that he lived 3,000 years before. What do we know about life in ancient Egypt? I have to tell you that in its own way, in its own unique way, I feel better able to fulfill that idea of Kehidu Yatzam Mitzrayim. We say Lefichach Anachnu Chayavim. Therefore, we are duty bound Lahodos Lahalel to praise and to laud and to appreciate what Hashem has done for us and for our forefathers. 1 year ago, I was in bed with a high fever, breathing with difficulty, sleeping 16, 18, 20 hours a day. Ruthie was ministering to me, trying to persuade me to eat something, to drink something, taking my blood pressure regularly, my oxygen level. I was within a hair's breadth of hospitalization, and many people who went to the hospital did not come back, and including many that I know actually as well. And last Pesach, I was just recovering from this virus, from this coronavirus, and I learned in my feverish stupor day by day of how many fatalities there were, including people close to me, not family members, but people close to me nevertheless. And it cast a long shadow. It was weeks after Pesach before, Baruch Hashem, I was fully recovered. And even then, who among us anticipated that 12 months later, we would still be in the shadow of this global contagion. And here we are, having mourned the passing of so many people that we know and that we love, including many Gedolei Yisrael, many great people, greatest rabbis of the generation, succumbed to this virus, as well as others who died of natural means as well in the past year. And therefore, for us and the Simon family, the Seder night is going to be also a Seudas Haggadah, a repast of gratitude, of appreciation to Hashem for the fact that I thankfully recovered from that terrible illness. And therefore, when we say that a person should regard himself as if he left Mitzrayim, so again, I'm sure they didn't have coronavirus in Mitzrayim, they had a lot of other problems, but I don't think they had this particular import from the Far East in Mitzrayim. But the idea of being redeemed from peril, from suffering, from the possible uncertainty or a baleful fate, and the sense of redemption and gratitude and appreciation is something which I feel this year, Mitzvah Hashem, I will be able, Zocha, to look back on every year, one Pesach after another for a long, long time to come, and have that appreciation that it was just this time of year in the days leading up to Pesach 1 year ago that I was recovering, and Baruch Hashem, I was redeemed. So I think collectively we as a people, in terms of the Jewish community, and really all of our society and so much of the world should have that same appreciation as well, together with sadly those who have been struck, people close to them who have been actually struck down by this contagion as well. But at a personal level, I feel in a stronger position to fulfill this sense of gratitude and the sense of redemption from peril to light. And in Mitzvah Hashem, this Pesach will represent the beginning of not only the era of redemption for the Jewish people, which we celebrate every year in Nisan, but also a brighter future for the entire world as we emerge from the dark shadow of this contagion. Thank you very much for listening. We finished just before 9:30. So those who have had enough, then kol hakavod, thank you for joining us. If there are any questions, you can, by all means, you're welcome to ask. And if I can help, then I'll certainly help. And if I can't, I'll try to get back to you as necessary. So with you, if anyone, or maybe we've answered all the questions.
Yes, I have a question because actually when in West Borough of London, they started to send the bin to families, they say that one must remember that it belongs to them. So in practice, one has to remember, even if it is not something that is chametz itself, but for example, aluminum foils that used to contain chametz, one has to remember not to throw it into the bin on the Shabbat after eating, because it would be change of property from my property to their property, isn't it?
Change. I see what you're asking. It's an interesting question. I don't think that it would be a sort of would be included in the Isser of Masa Umatan. The idea of changing property is only if you're giving something like as a gift or selling, where there's a gzeir against that. But according to your suggestion that the bin belongs to the council, you couldn't put anything in the bin on Shabbos ever, which I don't think is the case. But you know, when it comes to chametz, excuse me, if we're talking only about crumbs or something like that, if it's less than a kazait, then if you discard it, you're showing that you don't want it anymore and you're sort of disassociating yourself.
No, but if it is an aluminum foil, something this size, a container that I'm not going to use anymore, and it is rather battered also, something like that, I thought.
Well, I don't think I would worry about that. And we mentioned already, like if you're worried about the chametz per se, you know, you can put some bleach on it or something like that, which can render it a bottle, and that will render it inedible. So that would also be a way of expunging it or destroying it. But as I said in our presentation earlier, the main thing is that if one minimizes the amount of chametz that is still in his home on Shabbos, then you know you've solved most of your problem. Just someone has asked me a practical question about kashering a dishwasher. Dishwasher can be kashered for Pesach if it is metal, which most of them are metal nowadays, and if the racks are in good condition. If they are cracked, the racks are made of metal, but they have a rubber covering. So if the rubber is cracked or distressed, so to speak, then you could have an issue about whether the hechsher process is thorough. But under normal circumstances, if the racks are in good condition, you can kasher your dishwasher for Pesach. In order to do that, you need to be sure it's clean, which in its normal state it is clean. You need to check the disposal, because that is where the food particles will accumulate. So you need to check that and empty that out. And you need to run it through a complete cycle on the most intense setting with the detergent as well. Now, that is an acceptable method, and that is what we are recommending. If you have the means of getting a new set of racks, it is not too costly, or if you have access to such a thing, if you can order it in time for Pesach, that is ideal. The Simon family have that because over the years we've had a different dishwasher, whatever it might be. And
another thing, yes.
Yeah.
Another thing is that
I just want to finish. Yeah, and therefore we have a separate racks for Pesach, but you need space to store that, etc. If you don't have separate racks, you can just kasher it. So, okay, some of are recommending a special detergent, but it's not necessary. Use the regular detergent and run it through on a full cycle, and that is sufficient to kasher your dishwasher for Pesach.
Yes. Another thing is that I have in the pantry the chametz that I sold, but the fact is that there is a standalone freezer, and there is a rack of like a fruit rack that contains some cans or pasta, things like that. But somebody said that it has to be 10 tefachim tall, that is 90 centimeters. And it is barely that high.
If it's closed so that it's
closed,
obscured from view, then that's fine. That's all you need. But I would say that when you close it, it's proper to seal it with tape and to take a Post-it note or something like that. If you've got Post-it notes like this, so take one and write on it chametz. And the purpose of that is as a way of reminding oneself that this cabinet is off limits on Pesach. Strictly speaking, the contents don't belong.
That is not a cabinet. It is standalone. It is under the ironing yes, a plank that I don't use. It is only the fruits on it. It is under that, and it is completely covered by a bed sheet on all sides.
If you can put it in a separate cabinet or behind a door of some sort, that would be better. If that is possible for you, if you have a place where you can create some space for it, that would be better, because you see, strictly speaking, what you've done is adequate, because if you sell your chametz, it doesn't belong to you. Since it doesn't belong to you and you don't see it because it's obscured, that is sufficient, strictly speaking. But it is praiseworthy to be able to actually seal it off in a separate designated room or cabinet or closet or something like that. But as long as it's obscured from view and it's covered, and especially, as I was saying, if you can designate it in a visual way, chametz, it serves as a reminder that you won't inadvertently access something there. That's what I would recommend.
And a third thing is that it is rather peculiar. I have two electric systems in the kitchen. The main one is not so reliable, so that the bulbs burn. I have only on Shabbat the light in one corner of the kitchen, and it is the only light that remains on during Shabbat. Only this time it is going to be followed by 2 days of Yom Tov. When it is two of them, I know that it is not burning because it hasn't burned as yet. I hope that for 3 days it will not cause problems.
I see. Yeah, well, you might try to experiment with it in advance, but yeah, you know, some of these things are just can be a bit hit and miss. Usually you find that if you get a system that is tested and reliable, then, you know, you can count on it. But as you say, sometimes 3 days is a lot. It's certainly not common, and meaning it's not common in the Jewish calendar, and it's certainly not something which the manufacturers anticipate that an appliance will be left on for 3 days continuously. But hopefully it
What was the question about? A hot plate or what?
No, it is just the bulbs of the light.
Oh, the light.
The light bulbs, yeah. Okay. Look, hopefully, you know, if you have low energy light bulbs, then those tend to be longer lasting because they don't get as hot. But look,
we have our lights on a timer and low energy lights.
Yes, that's an idea as well. If it's practical to.
Those ones are the one with 2 coils, the modern ones. So it should be better.
Yeah. As you say, the ones which are the modern ones, which are low energy, they also produce less heat, and that's why they're less energy. They generate less heat, and they are more longer lasting for that same reason as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So hopefully it will not cause you any distress. Any more questions about the Pesach preparation? If anyone has questions that you think of, you're welcome to email me. I'm sure you have other rabbis.
I apologize if on Thursday, instead of following the lesson of the parasha, there is yet another lesson about preparing the Seder. And I think that perhaps as mitzvot, it's more important to be quite sure about.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
gentlemen. Thank you for participating. It's lovely to see so many friends on the Zoom, and hopefully one day soon it will be possible to see more people in person as well. But this is the next best thing to being there, as we used to say about long distance once upon a time. So I wish everyone Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And again, if I can be of any further help, feel free to get in touch. You can write me and I will do my best to get back to you. You can call to discuss it if need be as well. Okay, thank you. And the Laila Tov L'Kulam. I want to thank also our host. I think that Dr. Schmidt has been kindly serving as host for tonight. And okay, so wish everyone Laila Tov.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.